Yes, in an ideal world, in a perfect world, we would have this entire facility built in a place where we could maximize restaurant location, downtown location, hotel. We would have all of that figured out. But that's not where we're at. And the comment that I made was that we shouldn't allow perfection be the enemy of progress, right? Because doing nothing is not an option, right? At the end of the day, we know that our own community, through the surveys, have expressed the desire to want to see an improved facility, have expressed the desire to see a facility that can host rodeos and can host concerts. And so let's do it.
Yep.
And so that's what our focus is right now.
Well, what's up, everyone? Welcome back to another episode of Town Talk. We're here with someone who I think you're going to be really excited to hear from because it's a topic that has been long awaited. And it is our city manager, Jesús Garza, talking about, you going to tell him?
The community center.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
No sound effect.
Our own.
We could do our own drum roll.
Community center.
It's a big deal.
It is.
I mean, I know you've already been out in the community talking about it. We've had some through our Citizens Academy program of our own talking about it. And of course, on social media, we had this post that we made that kind of blew up. My goodness. It was exciting, wasn't it? So whatever some of the questions you're hearing out in the community, we're going to talk about that. But first, I wanted to ask you, why did the community center expansion project even come up? I mean, obviously, its origination came from and was derived between you and council support, but there was also some experts involved, right?
Yeah,
Some
absolutely.
research, some studies.
Well, thank you for having me again on this
thanks for being
award-winning podcast.
Oh, professing the future. I like it.
100%. But you hit the nail on the head. This is a very important project for our community.
Right.
Because it hits on enhancing livability. It hits on our effort to growing Victoria. So it hits on so many of our objectives. You asked how did this even came to be, and it really all started a few years ago when we started to be more intentional with looking at our city facilities, and ultimately, that resulted in the new public safety headquarters building as the first sort of large facility project. But this one very quickly rose to the top, and it rose to the top simply because of us observing missed opportunities, and in order to take advantage of the missed opportunities, we decided to start a formal master planning process. We hired Populous a couple of years ago, a firm that specializes in facilities like this as well as others. But they came down and they worked with our steering committee. They put together community surveys, and all of this data and feedback from stakeholders and from the community really validated what we were thinking, which is that the facility has a lot of potential. It needs upgrades in technology. It needs additional bathrooms.
Absolutely.
The arena currently is very limited in what it can do. We don't host certain events that we'd like to host, rodeos, concerts. We don't really have a facility large enough to be able to do that. And so over time, the plan organically grew into what we're recommending, which is basically adding a new covered arena in the back of the site that would have 3,000 permanent seats within it, but could be converted to up to 4,500 for a concert setting, converting the existing arena into a new expo hall that would facilitate doing recreational sports, would facilitate having larger private events, larger weddings, larger quinceañeras, larger nonprofit fundraisers, but also change the programming of the space so that we can more highlight and improve what the dome has to offer, for example.
Sure.
One of the shining things within the dome, of course, is the stage that's there, right? But it's not in an ideal location.
Right.
We're limited with like green room capabilities and other things. We're limited with technology. So how can we reshape that to be able to improve that?
Right.
And so we're renovating and expanding all at the same time, but certainly focusing on expansion with the expansion of a new covered arena, as well as the expansion through renovation of the existing arena into an expo hall. And so we're very excited about that. And of course, we've embarked on a pathway to fund it. And I'm happy to get into that as we get into the FAQs or
Yeah,
whatever
absolutely.
questions you
That
might
was
have.
actually going to be my next question. And so, just real quick, recapping what you were just talking about with Populous, they did do a community survey with the stakeholders who frequent the community center and even others outside of that.
Right.
And majority of the feedback that I recall the results resulted in was overwhelming support for renovating and expanding this for various reasons, whether you come for the livestock show, but there's a lot of others beyond that who want a big concert going, capacity here in Victoria, which we don't currently have actually, that this would help fill the void of. And so that was really cool to learn about. So speaking of funding, that's actually my next question is how will this project be financed?
So that's obviously a great question. And through the work of our consultant, we also basically came up with a budget. And so we have a max budget of $35 million for this project. And that includes everything that I just mentioned. In addition, it also includes site improvements. I left that part out, but that's important.
Right. Yeah.
Because we're also enhancing the fairgrounds. So currently where the carnival takes place or the circus set up or whatever else might want to be out there, we plan on enhancing that site, adding some RV hookups to the perimeter,
Right.
adding permanent restroom buildings to just enhance what's out there, adding some parking, fixing the parking, improving the flow through, shifting the entrance to be a little bit more centrally located. So there's more to it than just the buildings. And so in any case, ultimately that's up to $35 million. And one of the very first things that I always like to do is just see how do cities everywhere else pay for stuff like this.
Right.
I have some experience with how to pay for projects like these. I was involved with the convention center expansion project for the city of San Antonio.
Nice.
Years ago, involved with the master plan and improvements to the JK Northway in Kingsville. So I had a sense of how that takes place, and
Right.
And so that was important because there's no need to reinvent the wheel.
Right.
And ultimately, we decided to pursue what's referred to as a venue tax, which is an opportunity to leverage the visitors that come to your community and stay in your hotels. Also an opportunity to leverage the utilization of car rentals in your community. In San Antonio's case, for example, that's how the AT&T Center was built
Nice.
back in 2000 when the Spurs, or the Bear County, I should say, built that arena. And the convention center expansion project as well from roughly, that was about 12 years ago. And in Kingsville, it was the same thing. It was a venue tax. And so we looked at the possibility of exploring those funding mechanisms for us, which is 2% increase to the hotel occupancy tax rate and a 5% addition or inclusion of a 5% motor vehicle tax on car rentals. We figured that could help generate about $15 million to go towards the 35.
Right.
And so we obviously still needed to come up with some additional funding sources. And we've done a great job over the years of paying off our debts early and just managing a really good capital improvement plan. And so we also want to take advantage of us having some opportunities within our existing capital improvement plan over the next few years. And so we decided to commit $15 million in certificates of obligation to go towards this project. That's simply just from us paying debt off early and just managing a really good debt program and capital improvement plan. And then the remaining $5 million is from cash that we need up front to pay for things like design, as an example, and some other things. And so we plan on partnering with our Self-Sax Development Corporation primarily to help front some of those expenses.
Right.
And so in total, $35 million. None of these funding mechanisms have a direct impact on property taxes or anything to that effect. And so that's the beauty of this, is that we have found a way to fund this improvement without having to propose any increases to property tax rate, and by leveraging these new funding mechanisms that cities use all across the state in the form of the venue tax and the motor vehicle tax.
Entirely not a new concept. It's
100%.
being used by other bigger
Correct.
and other cities in general across the state of Texas and beyond, I'm sure. And so I think the biggest takeaway that you and I have talked about in the past, Jesus, leading up to this podcast really, is that the fact that the venue tax will not affect any Victoria residents' property tax rate or bill. You just said that, but I wanted to reiterate it. It will be paid by those staying in hotels inside city limits, which are largely out-of-town visitors, which is great. The people who live here get to benefit from it, while those who are visiting primarily are contributing to that sales tax fund. So
That's the intent.
That is the intent. I love it. I just had to say it. That was what at least was a hook, line, and sinker for me in the beginning when I was learning about the project. I thought, that's interesting. Okay, are you ready for a few questions?
Sure, let's do it.
Let's switch it up. Okay, so I think this is pretty straightforward, but kind of talking about what's going to be on the ballot. So this is a May 3rd election, right? 2025. We are here in 2025, so in a few months, you're going to see it on the election ballot. And so what are some things that our residents can expect when they come to the polls?
Great question. I think just based off of recent history in our community, of course, our community is accustomed to seeing measures on the ballot from the school district as primarily. Recently we had Victoria College have a measure on a ballot that was successful. And so the beauty of ours is that because it's got nothing to do with property taxes, it will look a little different on the ballot. And it will be very specific with what the funding would be utilized for. And so, for example, we had to adopt a venue project, which is the community center project. And so that'll be very black and white on the ballot measure. It'll be one ballot measure. And so even though it's two things that we are proposing, they'll be together on one ballot measure. And that ballot measure will basically read that approving that measure would authorize the city to establish the community center, which is a sports and community venue project, and impose the 5% on motor vehicles, impose the 2% on hotels for purposes of the community center venue project. And so I think the public can expect the ballot language to be very clear, that what we're proposing has nothing to do with property taxes and has all to do with hotels, motor vehicle rentals, and all to do with the renovation of the community center.
Right. It's solely about the funding of it.
Correct.
Cool. Okay. Fun question. I think it's fun because it's actually frequently asked. Why not build a facility elsewhere? And the answer is very simple. I know this because you've told me in the past, and you've even said it just recently this week to our Citizens Academy group, which thanks for being there.
No
Thanks
problem.
to council.
Thanks
Shout
for the
out.
invite.
Yeah. And so what do you say to those folks? And some of them, they have a good point. It's a good thought in theory, but there's obviously a reason. And I'm sure it's something y'all looked at and discussed and had to cross the bridge of.
And I think the best way to start answering that question, is start talking about what we're actually trying to do with this facility and what it is and what it isn't.
That's good.
Because I think people's opinion about the location of it, I think is viewed by the lens in which they view the purpose of the facility.
Totally.
And so we're actually trying to combine three different things into one site.
Right.
Because we have a community center, and in my world, a community center is a space that locals can utilize for private events, for nonprofits, for local recreational events, right? We're also combining certain elements of what might typically be found in a convention center, right? That tackles large exhibitions,
Right.
And large group gatherings to that effect.
Yeah.
And then we're adding a arena component to it that hits on rodeos and concerts. In some larger communities, those are three different buildings in three different parts of town.
Sure.
Right?
Right.
We don't have the ability to do that financially, nor do we have the demand for each of those for them to be completely separate.
Sure.
Right? And so for us, when we looked at the option of building, let's say, the new arena somewhere else, it really boiled down to how are we maximizing these three elements?
Yeah.
And for us, it makes sense to have them all together. And
Right.
so the only true option to build this somewhere else was if we relocated what we already have and also built it somewhere else. And so when we explored rebuilding the 94,000 square feet that the community center currently has to offer, once we explored the cost of having to buy a piece of property, rebuild a parking lot of that size, extend utilities, build a new
That's
arena.
adding up real quick.
Right. Rebuild the stall barns, right?
Yeah,
Rebuild
yeah.
the fairgrounds.
Yep. Can't forget those.
It was basically $80 million. That was the price tag to do that.
That's steep.
And so we just don't have the funding resources to fund an $80 million project to relocate this whole project.
Right.
I made a comment at a recent council meeting that, unbeknownst to previous leaders, when they decided to place the community center there, they were basically deciding that that's where this type of facility would exist forever. Now, obviously, if Victoria were to grow, and then that would create opportunities to maybe be able to have elements of these in different places. But right now, that's just not our reality.
Yeah.
And while it might be perfect for us to have 3 different sites in 3 different parts of town, like, for example, some would argue having a convention center downtown with a hotel would make the most sense because that's what you find in other places. Some would argue that having the arena would make sense to have sort of in the middle of nowhere so that you can have unlimited space for RV hookups and unlimited space for just the trailers that need to access the site. And then there are those that view it from a conference perspective that are thinking north side, close to hotels, close to restaurants.
Yeah.
Right. And so, again, for us, keeping those 3 elements, community center, convention center, and arena together makes the most sense for where we're at financially and also from where we're at demand-wise for all of those 3 things.
That makes sense. Wow. That was solid. So
thank
we're
you.
serving all 3.
Basically, yeah.
Yeah.
And for $35 million, we'll basically
That's not
get
bad.
an updated state-of-the-art facility, right? Because the community center needs the improvement. We need to extend the life of that building, right? And so everybody sees in their everyday life that the cost of goods and services is going up significantly. And it's no different in the construction world. And so we have to just maximize the limited resources that we have available.
Right.
And this is a great project that I think achieves our objective of trying to meet those 3 needs at this time.
Yeah. No, that was great. I mean, I know that this has been something derived by you and your staff, and then, of course, council's support and approval to move forward with this project. And so one of the questions I was going to ask you next, but I wanted to sit on something. You said something, and it stuck out to me, actually, this week at our Citizens Academy program. They're getting a lot of shout-outs here. But you said something, and I want to let you say it, about perfection and progress.
Sure. No. Well, thank you for throwing that softball.
It's solid.
It is, and I'm going to hit a home run with it.
There you go. Ready?
Sure. But basically, yes, in an ideal world, in a perfect world, we would have this entire facility built in a place where we could maximize restaurant location, downtown location, hotel. We would have all of that figured out. But that's not where we're at. And the comment that I made was that we shouldn't allow perfection be the enemy of progress, right? Because doing nothing is not an option, right? At the end of the day, we know that our own community, through the surveys, have expressed the desire to want to see an improved facility, have expressed the desire to see a facility that can host rodeos and can host concerts. And so let's do it.
Yep.
And so that's what our focus is right now.
Yeah. And I think that falls in line with what Mayor was talking about too, and even you, about growing Victoria. So it's the same concept, right? You've got to look at your existing resources, look at your existing fund balance and say, okay, here's what we can do, here's what we can't do. How do we move forward knowing that?
Right.
Versus doing, like you said, nothing at all. So I love that. Thanks for sharing. All right, let's talk next steps because I know you've got to go. You're a busy man. When would construction begin and how long would it last if this were to get passed?
Not forever. So obviously we have the ballot measure in May. We are doing quite a bit of work behind the scenes to line up the ducks in a row to move quickly with things that we need to do in order to move this project along. And one of the considerations that was contemplated in this decision on when to place it on the ballot and on the timeline is when the current livestock show takes place, which we know takes place every February.
Right.
And so we don't want to displace our livestock show because the whole point of this is that they're one of the big benefactors of it. So if the venue tax passes in May, we anticipate immediately beginning in June, going into the design phase of this. That's where partnering with the Sales Tax Development Corporation comes into play because the Sales Tax Development Corporation has the cash on hand to be able to help pay for this. We would secure a general contractor in August, finalize design and the contract with the general contractor by the end of the calendar year so that they can start planning the construction and renovation of this. And they can basically start in March of 2026. Immediately following the 2026 livestock show. And the intent is to be substantially complete 10 months later.
Right.
So that by the time we come around to livestock show 2027, that this facility would be substantially completed.
Nice. That's pretty quick.
It is 100% quick. And so that's why we need to, that's why we're putting all this work behind the scenes to meet that tight deadline.
Awesome.
I alluded to earlier the rising cost of goods and services. That's another reason why it makes sense to proceed with this in a timely manner, because we want to make sure that we can order things at the current price and not have to delay everything a year and it'd be more expensive.
Oh, yeah. That makes total sense. Even thinking about housing, you're thinking about building a house. If anyone is, maybe we are. I don't know. But those sort of questions come up.
Congratulations.
No. It's just a conversation for talking about goals for the future.
Window shopping houses.
Right? It's kind of fun. I mean, just kind of not really being in the real estate market and then all of a sudden learning about it, you're like, wow, this is where we're at. I mean, in terms of costs.
Sure, yeah.
It's crazy. And if you're not doing it.
I've learned a lot about the real estate.
I bet you have, because you're doing a huge venue project over here. And so on a smaller scale, a house, but on a huge scale, a venue, my goodness. So I can't imagine how those construction costs can easily rack up.
Well, and, let's look at our public safety headquarter building as a quick example.
There you go.
When we first finished the master plan for that site and for what our police and fire departments needed for a centralized public safety headquarters, that estimate in 2009, in 2020, was in the low 30 million range. By the time we got around to doing the project, that had increased to 48.
Within a year's or two's
No,
timeframe?
basically it was within 2.5 years.
Yeah.
And so obviously the pandemic contributed significantly to the cost of goods and services. But that's just a quick example of how waiting can ultimately cost you more money. And we're trying to avoid that with this project by moving quickly.
And by not rebuilding somewhere else entirely, which was, like you said, up
which would
to,
also
if
be
not more,
expensive,
than like $80 million. So this one's up to 35, 11 of which would be funded by the venue tax, of course. And so my other question was going to be more on another vein, another arm, and I know we've got to wrap it up, so maybe two more questions. How are you able to, and you've said it in the past, I feel like I'm just always mimicking you, but hey, I remember things.
That's good.
How do you walk and chew gum at the same time? Because a lot of people might see this project.
So let me get up and walk.
You want to show me how to do that?
You have some gum?
So how do you do that as a city, as a council? I mean, obviously there's a lot of other needs in the community that I know do not go unaddressed. But can you speak to that for maybe the resident who's like, that's a lot of money. How are they able to pay for my street?
Well,
that's a big one.
Yeah, I definitely do use that term a lot, right? We can walk and chew gum at the same time. And obviously what my intent there is to express that we can multitask and focus on multiple things at the same time.
Right.
Obviously, it's impossible to keep everything that we're doing at the forefront at all times.
Right.
And so I recognize that to the general public, it might appear that things are coming in spurts. It's like, okay, well, now I'm hearing a lot about streets, so now might be the only time that they're focused on streets. Now I'm only hearing about public safety, so maybe that's just what's going on.
Right.
But the reality is that behind the scenes, there's always, all of these things are always a priority.
Right.
And we know that our streets need work, but we tackled that one. 3 years ago in 22, we made the decision to address 112 miles of streets between fiscal years 22 and 26. Which was a 50% increase from the number of miles of streets that we focused on between 2017 and 2022. And we're still on path for that, right? And so as far as we're concerned, we did prioritize increasing investment in streets by the decision that was made back in 22.
Right.
You don't hear about it a lot now because now we're simply in the implementation phase of it. But I hope that people are seeing the fact that every year we are fixing more streets, right?
Right.
And so that is something that's always a priority. And if you look at our budget flyer every year, we spend a substantial amount of money, on streets and utilities every year, comparatively speaking to other things.
Yeah.
So it's always a priority to invest in our streets and utility infrastructure. But we can do that, while at the same time being able to tackle some other things.
Right.
And that's what the beauty of other funding mechanisms like the venue tax are for. Because if that wasn't an option, then we would be forced to then have to either A, not do the project, or B, tap into more funds from our CIP, which would take away from money that we've dedicated to streets. And the thing that I'd like to point out there on streets, because I know it's an important topic for the public, is that we're accounting to do the capital improvement project at the community center, obviously in the next 2 years, while at the same time beginning the work on some thoroughfares that we know are of high interest to the public. So North Street, right? That's another question we
in front
get.
of the community center, yeah.
We're focused on the section in front of Patty Welder first. But it's in our plan to address North Street. Addressing the whole stretch of North Street from 5 Points to the community center is over $40 million, right? So we have to space that out.
Yeah.
But we're beginning. Guy Grant is another area of a thoroughfare that's a priority for council. These are large, expensive street projects, which is why they haven't been addressed in the past. And we've been able to develop a capital improvement plan that actually finally brings those corridors to the forefront, while at the same time being able to do the community center project because of being able to tap into these new funding sources that we hadn't tapped into in the past.
Right.
And so that's how you walk and chew gum at the same time.
Makes total sense. And something else that you've said in the past, and now it's left me blank. My goodness.
And she just said she was paying attention to me, and she just
I blanked
proved that
out.
she doesn't.
Can you give me some more coffee, AJ? I'm just kidding.
I don't know how I feel about this anymore.
No, you would always talk about just your professor, I think, in school would talk about.
About the budget and the priorities?
I mean, it's kind of like common sense, you put your money where your mouth is.
Yeah, basically.
Right.
If we're providing lip service that streets are important to us, are we actually putting the money behind
then show
that?
me your budget.
And we are.
And you are.
Right?
I've seen it.
And it's the same with the way that we do our operational budget, as well. So, but
just had to make that point because it's always. I like the metaphors, the symbolism.
Thank you for listening when I talk.
For a second. Well, is there anything else, Jesus, you think, coming back to the community center expansion project, that our residents really would benefit from knowing beyond the basics that we already covered? I know this is going to be an evolving discussion. Sure. Obviously, we can maybe come back at a later time if necessary. But is there anything else you would want to share?
I think I would share a couple things. So. Okay. Some of the other common questions that I've been getting as I've gone around and beginning to speak about this project is, of course, a concern around the impact that this improvement might have on other venues in our community. And the reality is that this project is intended to focus on providing spaces that are large, that no other venue in our community has to offer, right? So, for example, if we build the arena, we don't have any other facility in town that could fit 3,000 people seated, like in the arena in the rodeo format, and we don't have any other facility that could sit 4,500 people in a concert setting.
Right.
So we're not competing with anybody at that point. Right. The creation of the exhibition hall would allow for banquet style seating of close to 1,000 people. We don't have a facility in town that can host 1,000 people either for that type of setting. Right. So we're trying to focus on the large customers, if you will, and potential users. Right. Our intention here is to not compete with the smaller wedding venues that exist around town.
Right.
With that said, people have also asked, well, what does this mean for the cost of the facility in the future? Right.
We've seen that.
And I mentioned earlier, how we're trying to marry community center, convention center, arena, right? Because we're merging the idea of community center with convention center, it's our intention to keep this facility at a very affordable rate because that's the community center part of it, right? If we were in it to solely focus on being a convention center that makes money, then we would have to increase rental rates and then nobody would want to use it, right? But that's not what our goal is here, right? Another example was what we decided with concessions. When we were going through this process with our master planner, they said, you can make a lot of money if the city ran concessions for all events. And we said, yes, you're right, but we don't want to do that because we know that our community is accustomed to, and we want them to continue to bring in their own concessions, right? Bring in their own vendors to be able to provide service for their wedding, their quinceañera, or for the nonprofit that relies on concession sales as part of their revenue generation.
Right.
We don't want to mess with that. And so Our intent is to operate it as a community center, but with the quality of facility and sophistication of a convention center. And I think those are important distinctions to express.
Yeah.
Lastly, we also have received questions about, well, is the whole center going to be closed once it's going through renovation? So the intent is to phase out the improvements so that we continue to offer some space while it's being renovated. So, for example, we can renovate the existing arena and still utilize the dome and the annex. And then once the new expo hall is complete, we can then focus on renovating the annex and the dome, and events can continue to happen in the new expo hall.
Awesome.
Right? So we want to be mindful of all of that because we know that at the end of the day, we are that affordable option. And so we want to make sure that we can continue to honor that and be an option for our residents.
Yeah, absolutely. That was great. Well, there you have it, folks. You've learned all there is to know and more about the Community Center Expansion Project. And so if you want to get more information, of course, talk to us, right, at the end of the day. But you can visit our website, victoriatx.gov/community center. And then there you'll have an FAQ document. I mean, we should probably have like a graphic going right now, AJ. Maybe we could put that in post. But it's our website, and it's got our FAQs, the master plan that Jesus was talking about for the fairgrounds and the community center, and then his presentation that he goes to different community groups on. Also expect some more information going out to the community, probably closer to the election, which, again, as a reminder, is May 3rd. Visit vctxelections.org, which is ran by the county, for more information about those election dates as well. So, well, thanks again, Jesus. I appreciate you being here. A lot of good information. Yeah, it's a big one. So maybe we can come back and talk again. So
let's do it.
Until then, we'll talk to you next time. Thanks. Hey guys, thanks for listening to today's episode. Every new episode debuts every other Tuesday, so make sure to follow us, like us, subscribe on YouTube and Spotify, and we'll talk to you next time. Thanks.